Okay, it seems like the number of folks hopping in has slowed down a bit, so we'll go ahead and we'll get started. And anybody else that joins us can hop on in. Welcome, and thanks everybody for being here. Thanks for joining us on a Friday afternoon. My name is Patrick Gill, Director of Research and Data Strategy for Good Reason Houston. Today we'll be discussing 2026 STAAR scores and results for the Houston region. First, I'll provide some framing around who Good Reason Houston is and the STAAR test itself. And then we'll dive deep into what this year's numbers are telling us before finally turning to a discussion about upcoming changes to STAR and our assessment system. If you have questions, we'll have opportunity for Q&A at the end, but we'll be collecting questions throughout. Feel free to enter any questions you have into the Q&A at any point, and we'll address as many as we can at the end of the session. First, let me introduce today's speakers. You already know who I am, so I'll instead introduce my two colleagues who will do the bulk of the talking today. First up will be my research teammate, Dr. Mingyu Liu, who will be taking you through what this year's STAR results are telling us. Mingyu is the real brains behind our research operation, and I'm excited for y'all to be able to learn from her expertise. Next up will be Trista Bishop-Watt, our Managing Director of Government Relations. Trista is one of Texas's leading experts on education policy, and she'll be taking you through some recent legislative and administrative changes around STAR and student assessment. She'll also talk more about what those changes mean for you and for our students. Before getting into STAR scores, let me tell you a little about Good Reason Houston and why we do what we do. Here you can see what I'll call our problem statement. Our education system right now is doing pretty well at ensuring students graduate high school and that those graduates are leaving our public school system, meeting state benchmarks for post-secondary readiness. However, the further we get into our graduates' post-secondary lives, the more fall off on the path to living wage jobs and economic opportunity. Right now, only 1 in 5 Houston area public school graduates earns a living wage by their mid-20s. This is simply unacceptable and is a number that should galvanize all of us to want to do better by our students. That number is what motivates me personally and Good Reason Houston more broadly. We want to build stronger systems supporting student success to put our graduates on the path to earning at least a living wage by young adulthood. We see this systems level alignment as the great opportunity in front of us here in Houston. We need to build systems that are aligned across key sectors like pre-K-12, higher ed, workforce, nonprofit partners, and philanthropy to promote long-term student success and opportunity. Only through this alignment and deep collaboration can we achieve our North Star goal of doubling the rate of Houston area graduates earning a living wage by 2040. Building that alignment and creating the conditions for collaboration are exactly what we at Good Reason Houston try to do. By working at the local and state levels in the areas of both policy and practice with a cross-sector coalition of partners, we aim to connect the dots for our students. We work to raise awareness of where our education system is and needs to go, to advise leaders on how to improve the ways we're supporting students, and to advocate for systems-level changes that will drive long-term student success. We can't do this work without passionate, engaged partners like y'all. So, thank you for being here. So, why do STAR scores matter? The reason we're here today. I think 3 main reasons I want to identify. First, we know that student achievement is associated with long-term student outcomes. Simply, test scores give us a window into how well we're preparing our students for post-secondary success and opportunity. Our own research has identified 8th grade reading as a key indicator of students' likelihood of attaining a post-secondary credential, and we all know how foundational 3rd grade reading is. Second, STAR scores help us both to identify bright spots and success stories, and also to find areas where we need to continue pushing and improving. Critically, those bright spots help us find models, programs, and innovative practices we can learn from. Those are the proof points of what can drive student success that we can learn more about and figure out how to scale to bring that success to more students across our region. And I want to be clear that these principles remain true no matter what test we're talking about. Trista will discuss the upcoming changes to Texas's assessment system later on, but those 3 points I just talked about why STAR matters and why testing matters, remain valid no matter the system. Lastly, before we dive into the numbers, let's talk for a couple minutes about how STAR scores are determined. This is going to get a little wonky, so bear with me. I'm happy to answer any questions this explanation might raise. An important principle in test design is the ability to compare scores year over year. We want to be able to, for example, track whether we're making progress in supporting more fourth graders to meet grade level standards in math this year than last year, or the year before that, or 8 years ago. But making tests is hard. It would be a pretty unrealistic expectation that all 40 questions on the fourth grade math test this year would be exactly the same difficulty as the 40 questions on last year's fourth grade math test, much less the fourth grade math test from 2018. To account for these differences in test difficulty and design across years, the Texas Education Agency uses a statistical process called equating. I won't bore you with all the details, but I just want you to know that equating takes the number of questions a student gets right on the test in a given year, what's called their raw score, and places it on a standardized scale that is comparable year after year. TEA does this every year for every test so that we can compare scores from 2026 to those from 2024 or even those from 2018, even though the tests looked very different back then. Back then, students were still taking STAAR with a number 2 pencil. Though these scale scores are comparable across years, the number of questions, again, the raw score, needed to get to a particular scale score or performance level may shift slightly year to year, taking into account variations in the tests themselves. In the middle of the slide there, you'll see an example. On the fourth grade math test this year, a student who got 27 out of 40 questions right received a scale score of 1615, falling into the meets grade level performance bucket. The fourth grade math test in 2024 was apparently a little more difficult, though, so to receive essentially the same scale score, a student only needed to get 26 out of 40 questions correct. This also fell into the meets grade level performance bucket. Equating happens for just about every test you can think of. As another example, without equating, we wouldn't be able to talk about or compare SAT scores over time because that 1400 I got way back in 2007 wouldn't mean the same thing as a 1400 today. Just go ahead and go to the next slide for me. Thank you. So, to summarize, to conclude, why do we need equating? Equating ensures that our scores are fair year over year, placing all students on a level playing field. It is also necessary for translating complex scores into plain language we can all understand. Are students meeting grade level standards or not? Without equating, we'd have no way of tracking or comparing student progress over time, which is one of the main goals of standardized tests of any kind. So to summarize, equating is the statistical process that lets us compare STAAR, SAT, whatever scores over time across test administrations and is a completely normal process. In fact, it isn't just normal, it's necessary. And that's enough introduction. Let's turn to why you're all here. How did our students do on STAAR in 2026? I think there are four key headlines I want to share with y'all. First, that our students set a new record high in reading achievement across the region, breaking the previous record set just last year. An all-time high percentage of our students are meeting grade level standards in reading. Second, math scores have continued to make steady progress, and we've finally nearly fully recovered to pre-pandemic levels of math achievement. Third, Houston Region students showed growth across most grades and subjects, with Algebra 1 showing the highest year-over-year growth, with an 8-point gain in the proportion of students meeting grade level expectations. And finally, Black and Hispanic students have made especially notable progress in reading achievement compared to they were before the COVID-19 pandemic. This progress is noteworthy and should be celebrated, but gaps between more and less advantaged student groups in our region still remain far too large. With that, I'd like to turn things over to my colleague, Dr. Mingyu Liu, who will take you deeper into the numbers. Mingyu?
Thank you, Patrick. Hey, friends. Thank you again for joining us this afternoon. In this section, I will walk you through how students across the Houston region performed on the 2026 STAAR exam, as well as the year-over-year trend. So first, let's start with our younger learners. So what you see here is that the region trend. Let's start with the Houston region as a whole, looking at how grades 3 through 8 performed year over year. You can see right where the pandemic hit. Testing paused in 2020, and both subjects dropped hard the year after. And fast forward to 2026, reading has made its way all the way back, and now sits at 52% meets and masters, a new all-time high record for the region. And that means more kids today are reading at grade level than ever before. And that's not just a recovery, that's a real growth past where we started. And what about math? Math had a bit longer climb. We're at 42% meets and masters this year, still 3 points below where we stood in 2019. But it's worth celebrating as well about how far have we come back. So next, let's zoom out a level and see how the Houston region compare with the state and with a group of districts that's very similar to ours. So compared with the rest of the state, Houston region trails just very slightly. 1 point behind math, 2 points behind reading. Now, there's a comparison that also matters a lot. The districts that are very similar to ours in size and student population. Here, we group them together and call them Texas urban districts. So I'm going to call them TUD for the rest of this presentation. So compared against TUD, Houston region is ahead by 3 points in both math and reading. So the story we see here is that we are a little bit behind state average, but we are outperforming the districts that face very similar challenge to ours. Next, let's look at how far Houston region grew this past year compared to the state and to TUD. So in math, Houston region grew 2 points this year, ahead of state's 1 point gain, but slightly behind TUD's 3 point gain. And reading here tells a slightly different story. Houston region and TUD both grew 2 points and both outpaced the state 1 point gain. So here's my takeaway for this slide. Houston is beating the state in both subjects. In math, we will still need to keep up with our peer districts, TUD. In reading, we're right there with them. Now let's bring this down to the district level and see how Houston area districts are leading the way. So zooming into individual districts, one thing stands out across the board. Every single Houston area district performed better in reading than in math in 2026. Spring Branch ISD leads the entire region in both subjects. 56% meets and masters in math, and 63% meets and master in reading. And that's well above our Houston region average, which 42% meets and master in math and 52% in reading. Galena Park ISD was also performing quite well this year, with 51% meets and master in math and 54% meets and master in reading. So if you work with families in any of these districts that saw big growth, there are exactly the kind of number worth bringing into your own conversation with them. So that's where districts stand today. Next, let's look at how much growth they have had past year. From 25 to 26, most Houston area districts move forward in both subjects. Spring Branch, and Yes Prep were leading the way. Keep Houston also saw strong growth with math, about 5 points, but not so much increase made in reading. And region-wide, we averaged at 2-point gain in both math and reading. So the takeaway here is that growth wasn't just limited to one or two districts. It was truly a regional trend, and with a handful of districts pulling ahead faster than the rest. So that's the story of our younger learners. Now let's move on to our EOC results. So just like we saw in the grades 3 through 8, Houston region has made real progress here. Algebra 1 has grown steadily and sharply, and we're now at 57% mid-semester in 2026, just 1 point below pre-pandemic levels. And English EOC broke its own record set just last year. And today we're at 55% mid-semester, 10 points above where we stood in 2019. And this is truly a new record for the region. So from last year alone, Algebra 1 gained 7 points, and English EOCs gained 5 points. There are exactly the kind of gains that translate into more students ready for college and career, as Algebra 1 and English EOC are the gatekeeper courses, and what we see here is true movement, real growth. And next, let's see how that stacks up against the state and against TUD. So in Algebra 1, Houston region was leading the way, ahead of both state and TUD. We're at 57% mid-semester, several points above the state and TUD. In English EOC, it's a more of a mixed picture. Houston region was at 55% mid-semesters, which beat TUD, but trailed state by 3 points. So let's be clear that Algebra 1 is clearly a region strength for us, and English EOC are an area for us to keep pushing on in the future. So how fast did Houston region grow compared to the rest of the Texas? Algebra 1 growth was strong everywhere this year. Houston region grew 8 points, state grew 7, TUD grew 9 points. In English EOCs, Houston's 5-point growth matched TUD exactly and beat state's 4-point gain. It means our teenagers are moving in the right direction and they are moving fast. And this is one of the strongest growth story you will see during this whole presentation. So let's bring this down to the district level again and see who is leading on EOC. So across the region, most districts saw students do better in Algebra 1 than on English EOC in 2026. Harmony Public School led the entire region in both subjects. 74% meets and master in Algebra 1, and 71% meets and master in English EOCs. And that's well above the Houston region average of 57% meets and master in Algebra 1 and the 55% passing rate in English EOC. On the other hand, Spring here has a little bit more room to grow, around 40% in Algebra 1 and 43% in English EOC. However, as we're about to see, Spring ISD actually made very sizable growth this past year. So let's look at how district level growth on EOC in the next slide. So guys, this is where the story gets super exciting. Every single Houston area district had growth in both Algebra 1 and English EOC this year. Klein ISD posted 13-point jump in Algebra 1, which is the largest gain in the region. Spring ISD and Yes Prep each grew 12 points in Algebra 1, and both also posted the strongest English EOC gains at 7 points each. Spring Branch ISD wasn't falling far behind by growing 11 points in Algebra 1, just one past year. So region-wide, we averaged an 8-point gain in Algebra 1 and 5-point gain in English EOCs. So progress like this never happened by accident. And this is a true celebrating moment with the districts, teachers, and families. So that's the story of the grades 3 through 8 and for our end of course exam. Now let's move on to the final part of the story, the STAAR perform across student group? Let's start by looking at the race ethnicity groups. So in math, across all grades level, Black and Hispanic students grew faster than their Asian and white peers this year. So from 2025 to 26, Black students gained 3 points. Hispanic students saw 4 points gain. And that's a real and meaningful progress. But there's the other part of the story. The gap between across all the groups haven't closed much over time. So in 2026, Asian students are at 76% mid-semester, white students at 66, Hispanic students at 42%, and Black students at 33% mid-semester. So the growth we saw here is real and it's encouraging, but the gap left to close is still pretty significant. And next, let's go over some reading performance. So the reading performance across all grades tells a more hopeful version of the story. So in 2026, Black and Hispanic students have now surpassed their own pre-pandemic reading level by 12 points and 11 points, respectively. That is truly a huge growth for both groups. And it's truly narrowing the gap with their Asian and white peers. And this is the kind of recovery worth celebrating loudly. And even as we're still monitoring the growth, the gaps that remains. And next, let's look at how performance by economic status. So economically disadvantaged students have made real progress too. So in reading, they surpassed their pre-pandemic levels and now sits at 46% mid-semester in 2026. In math, however, they have not quite recovered yet, sits at 38% mid-semester in 2026. And meanwhile, their non-economically disadvantaged peers have recovered in both subjects, 64% mid-semester in math and 74% passing rate in reading. So the gap by economic status is still wide, especially in math. And last but not least, we have another student group to look at, our emerging bilingual students. So the stories about emerging bilingual students here is also very encouraging. In 2026, emerging bilingual students have recovered to their own pre-pandemic level in both reading and math. So on average, they gained 2 points in math and 14 points in reading. Their non-emergent bilingual peers, by comparison, have only fully recovered in reading, not math. Wow, guys, we just covered so much information. So let's recap by going over the key takeaways again. So the key takeaway here is reading scores in the Houston region broke their own record, reaching another all-time high. And math is also steadily improving, and it's now closing to pre-pandemic level. And students grew across most grades in both math and reading, with Algebra 1 leading the growth at 8-point gain in just 1 year. That's truly amazing. And last but not least, Black and Hispanic students outperformed their pre-pandemic level in reading with 12 points and 11 points respectively. However, please keep in mind the differences between the more and less advantaged groups remained far too large. So this is the end of this section. Now I'm gonna pass it to our lovely Trista, and she will talk more with you about STAAR reform. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mingyu. Hi, all. So While our focus today was really on those assessment results that we've seen for the region and the progress that we've seen as Houston, we do want to take a moment to really forecast some changes that are going to be happening to the state assessment system over the course of the next couple of years. Texas is actually transitioning to a new assessment system. Beginning in the 2027-2028 school year, the STAAR will be replaced with a new system that's currently called the Student Success Tool, although this could change over time. And ultimately, that was designed through a change at the legislature, that would be House Bill 8, to provide more timely information about student progress throughout the school year. So just to really hone in on this, we will have STAR for one more year next school year, and then the state will transition to a new assessment system. So there are some things to keep in mind about the changes that are happening, and I'm more than happy to answer questions about particulars here. But at a high level, looking just at the assessment model, currently with the STAR, we measure student performance at one point at the end of the school year through a longer end of year test. The new tool will measure student progress across three shorter assessments at the beginning, middle, and end of year. The beginning and middle of year assessments will actually be adaptive. And what that means is that when a student answers questions, the future questions that they receive changed based on how well they performed on previous questions. So a lot of our school districts actually use different types of assessments to monitor progress throughout the beginning, middle, and end of the school year right now. So this won't be a significant change in testing for most of our students in terms of the types of tests that they're taking. But what this means is there will now be an aligned state test that allows them to take those assessments and have them be comparable across the school year and to measure that progress. We'll talk about the implications of that on the next slide and also some of the options for flexibility for school districts with alternative assessments. The timeline for these changes, I'm sorry, can we go back one slide? The timeline for these changes is also significant here. So the results of STAR usually take several weeks after testing for them to be announced. We're doing the STAR webinar this in June right now because assessment results come out pretty late after students are tested in the spring. Under the new tool, results will be returned within 48 hours of each testing window. This is really quick. In terms of all of the states, this is really one of the fastest turnarounds that are available. The benefit here is the use for instruction. So STAR has always been an end of year snapshot. The new through year assessment system offers a way to monitor ongoing progress throughout the school year in an aligned assessment system and also serve the purpose of that end of year snapshot. And finally, overall testing time. A lot of our districts, like I mentioned before, use different types of supplemental benchmark assessments in order to get the progress monitoring that they need throughout the school year. Under the new system, those benchmark tests will be replaced with just this three-year system, again, with some flexibility provided to districts through potential alternative assessments if desired. I will name, since we have a little bit of time here, that there are some additional changes that are already being implemented to our assessment system that came through the same law. So TEA has implemented some new practices to reduce testing anxiety that are being incorporated to the instructions and operation of our tests. And now parents can access results much easier and quicker. The family portal now has one-click access to assessments, so hopefully that makes it much easier for families to be able to see how their students are doing. So looking at the implications of these changes and what it really means for students and families, educators, and our school districts, and how we can really be prepared for the changes that are coming after next year. students and families should anticipate quicker, more accessible results. The multiple testing windows and aligned assessment system can create more opportunities for families and educators to work together to address learning needs before the end of the school year. I know I've heard from some families that under the current STAAR, they get the results back and it's already too late for them to really be able to have meaningful conversations with their student's current teacher to see how instruction could be adjusted. So this could be an opportunity for families to have more of an interaction with educators to ensure instruction meets the needs of students throughout the school year and not just at the very end. For educators, this means that those official results, like I said, will be returned within 48 hours of each testing window. And that means that that's actionable information that can be used to adjust instruction, target interventions for students, and monitor student growth in real time throughout the school year. Most of our districts, again, use some sort of a monitoring assessment system throughout the school year. And so the benefit here is that alignment with the final end of year test so that everything is cohesive. But I would encourage, again, families and educators to really look at preparing for this shift and how these results can be used on an ongoing basis to support students and to target where students need additional instructional support. And then finally, for school systems, most of these changes are impacting at the district level and how districts are planning for assessments and implementing. So districts will have flexibility to use TEA approved alternative assessments for the beginning and middle of year. So TEA issued a call for those assessments and are in the process of really looking at them and vetting them to make sure that there's enough comparability so that we can trust that the results are reportable and that we can make assumptions based on how students are doing across different school systems. But it does help districts retain an opportunity for flexibility and to customize local assessment strategies based on maybe some of the assessments that they've currently been using if they do end up on TEA's approved list. So our school system partners should prepare in advance for these changes by first monitoring updates from the Texas Education Agency on the assessment development process. We know that there's not a lot of information exactly about what this looks like yet out there, but continuing to check in on this as it gets developed will be helpful. Evaluating your current testing requirements, any benchmark assessments that you currently use, and plan for any desired approved alternative assessments. So TEA does have a timeline for that available online for when those approved alternative assessments will be announced, but it's never too early to start planning and understanding what assessments might need to be phased out based on the new requirements by law. Communicate these changes to staff, families, and students in advance of the 2027-2028 school year. This is a shift in the way that we've traditionally done assessments. And more importantly, this does mean that for just that year, we're going to likely have an interruption in the comparability of data and maybe even some changes that could impact what the results of those assessments look like. So I would encourage district partners to be very transparent about the changes with their school communities so that everybody is on board and understands the differences that they're going to see. And finally, plan for integrating these results with instruction, interventions, and evaluation systems. If you're using benchmark assessments for some of your internal evaluation systems, make sure that you're planning in advance for how those might need to be transitioned, or again, if you're going to use an approved alternative assessment in order to do that. So those are just some things to keep in mind to help make this transition a little bit smoother. But as more information becomes available, we'll be sure to share.
Thank you, Trista. And now we're happy to wrap up the presentation portion of the presentation and turn to question and answer. I know we've already got some in the chat, which I'll start going through. Trista and I'll go back and forth depending on what the topic is. I already answered two previously, but I will voice over one of them as well, provide a little additional information because we've got some time. Dallas Bertola asked, is 2024-2025 taper data being used for the year-over-year comparisons? For those who are not as familiar with Texas education data sources, TAPR or TAPER, Texas Academic Performance Reports, is one of the ways that TEA publicly releases a whole lot of data on education, public education in Texas every year. Um, but that is not actually what we use for our STAAR data. We use the STAAR research portal, which I included the link in my written response there. And I just wanted to voice over that that data is actually slightly different for those who are using taper data for STAAR, because taper data does not actually include all STAAR test takers, because it is based on students who count for accountability purposes, which is not quite all students. There are some students that are excluded per some state regulations and rules from accountability calculations. And so those STAR test scores are not included in taper STAR data, but they are included in the research portal data, which is why we use the research portal data, because we want to account for all test takers. Um, Jillian asked, with the encouraging gains we're seeing in the latest STAR data, what trends or best practices are you seeing regarding motivation, mindset, or emotional readiness that supported this academic growth? I think that is a great question. And it is not one that I think the folks here on this call, the data nerds and the policy nerds, are the best equipped ones to answer. So, what I'm going to do is we already took note of that question, and we are going to get some perspective from our district partnerships team. They are really our curriculum and program experts at Good Reason Houston, and they'll have, I think, a lot more specific insights into that can help provide some information on this answer. And we'll include whatever they share with us in the follow-up message to this webinar, where we'll send out the recording. And we'll also send some like follow-up information. We'll include the response to that question in that follow-up, which you should receive next week. Um, Crystal asked, is there data to show how many students are opting out of STAR? This is a great question. The answer is not directly, and it is not available like via STAR data. There's not a count of opt-outs because opt-out is often an informal process on the part of families. And so really what you'd kind of have to do is you'd have to, which we have not done to be clear, but you'd kind of have to compare total student counts to testers and like make some assumptions there, but it would be based on assumptions, and that's not something that we have historically done. And then the third question, I am going to send this one over to you, Trista, about the materials that the State Board of Education is voting on and has been voting on over the past couple days.
Sure. So Janeth asks, how will the required list that the State Board of Education is currently voting on impact testing? So I believe what you're speaking to here is some of the TEKS adjustments, the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills adjustments that the SBOE is currently looking at right now. So they're looking at reading lists, vocabulary, and also social studies. And what the TEKS are for the state of Texas is basically what we believe as a state that students should know and be able to do for each grade level. And so the changes that are made at the State Board of Education that are incorporated into the TEKS do impact testing, in that our assessment system is based on those standards. We use a standards-based assessment system. So for each grade level, we're looking at, with any test, whether this is STAR or the new assessment system, where are students on acquiring that knowledge and skills that they need for each grade level, and ranking that in the, meets master's system. So when SBOE passes those changes, they will be integrated into the testing in to the extent that the knowledge and skills requirements are changing. So, for example, if you're talking about the reading list, they might not be tested on specific novels that a student has to read for each grade level. They're tested on the concepts, the knowledge, and the skills that they would need to acquire. So that's really what we're looking at with those changes. It might be more significant on the social studies side with those changes because we are often testing in our social studies and history specific knowledge that does require some memory.
Great. Are there any other questions? We've still got a few minutes, so if folks do want to ask more questions, happy to answer them. Yes. Hi. I hope I'm saying that right. Do you know of any research that compares EB students' TELPAS composite with their RLA STAAR performance, and if there are observable or actionable trends? That is a great question. And I will have to do a little digging to see if there's something that directly answers the question. So, to provide some context for folks who may not be familiar with, TELPAS is our standardized test that emergent bilingual students take before they reclassify into English only instruction. So, while they are receiving emergent bilingual services, to help determine whether they're ready for English only instruction. They take the TELPAS, and eventually, when at some point they will score high enough on the TELPAS, and then they do what's called reclassification, and they're no longer considered emergent bilingual students. Uh, but the connection between TELPAS and STAAR, I'll have to do some digging. I can say that before I worked at Good Reason Houston, I worked at the Houston Education Research Consortium at Rice, which is part of the Kinder Institute. And my HERC colleagues a few years ago completed a pretty extensive study of emergent bilingual students. And I will go ahead and after I answer Dallas's other question, I will go ahead and I will pull the link to some of HERC's, or if somebody else, Ming maybe wants to go pull some of those links to HERC's EB studies from a couple years ago, that may be helpful context. And Dallas asks the preliminary star data. Oh, yes, in the portal. This is preliminary star data from what I understand. Is the Texas Research Data portal data updated or finalized at a later date? Great question. This is indeed preliminary star data. What that means is that school districts and campuses have an opportunity after they've reviewed this preliminary data from TEA to potentially make changes if they notice something's wrong, like maybe a few students were coded incorrectly or something like that. So they have a chance to submit and request changes from the TEA, which will then be incorporated into the data and is re-released about a month to 2 months later, depending it changes year to year. And that finalized star data is indeed available via the research portal. So whenever that's put out by the state, usually it's late July, early August. Whenever that finalized star data is available, the data in the portal is updated accordingly. And we will actually update our own data sources at that time. Typically, this doesn't make a huge difference. You may see like at most 1 to 2 percentage point changes on a given test or grade, but usually it's not even that noticeable because the changes might happen at like for one campus, for one grade level at one campus, which wouldn't affect broader district or region level numbers. So the changes are typically quite small between preliminary and finalized star data, but we will update our numbers at that time when that data becomes available.
And Patrick, I'll jump in here with something tangentially related. There is another change that I'll flag that House Bill 8 from last legislative session ushered in for our school district partners. It used to be that if you needed to rescore for an assessment that you would have to submit that, and a lot of that cost fell on districts. TEA is now going to be required to automatically rescore the English portion of the ELA test if the change in that English portion score would change the overall grade level score for a student. So that will be automatic and those costs will be covered by TEA, and districts can still submit requests for rescoring on top of that.
Uh, Lupita is asking about the different classifications of EB students, EB monitored first year, second year, third year. This is after they've reclassified. TEA continues to check how they're doing, and they call them monitored like they were. If they're monitored first year, that means they reclassified the previous year, so they're 1 year post reclassification. Second year is 2 years post reclassification, etc. And yes, TEA does publish STAR data in that way. We don't typically break out our analysis to look at those students specifically, but we certainly can, and I think it's an interesting area of further research. So I appreciate you flagging that for us. And for those who are interested in HERC's, the Houston Education Research Consortium's research on emergent bilingual students, I did drop that link into response to High's questions, so that is there in the answered questions area.
We'll also follow up after this with all of the questions and resources that we've addressed here. So if you miss clicking on that link, we'll make sure that it's included later.
That makes complete sense that the post-classification data would be good for districts. We will flag that, and we'll talk to our district partnerships team too, because we're happy to work with them on how they think giving that data directly to districts and how it would be helpful. So thanks again for flagging that. Any other questions? Any stray thoughts folks want to chat about? Because if not, I'm happy to give you all a few minutes back on your Friday afternoon. I know we're deep in the throes of summer at this point, so folks probably have, weekend plans and that kind of thing. So happy to like let y'all get started on that if you want. You are very welcome for this review, and we also agree that it is very promising for our region, and we're really excited about the progress that our students and our schools showed. Oh, we got a new curriculum question. That is definitely a question that I think is a great I won't read it word for word, but essentially it's about student cognitive development and capturing that. And that is a question that I will definitely be sending over to our district partnerships team because again, they're the curriculum experts on our team, and we'll see what perspective they might be able to provide, and we'll include that when we follow up next week. So thank you for flagging that and raising that important issue. All right, well, with that, we thank you all for being here, and on behalf of Mingyu and Trista, everybody have a great weekend. Stay safe, and we will see you all next time.